Several of the scripture readings today outline a vision of a better world after times of suffering, chaos, hardship, and devastation of the land. Instead, they joyfully describe how the Lord will pour out abundance, often in the form of rain. The Lord will pour out the Spirit, which will inspire dreams and visions, a message of hope to cope with the uncertainty, and assurance that all our challenges can be overcome through our faith and through God's love. Even the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector seems to suggest a vision of a more just world. The self-righteous Pharisee, who in his prayers points out his superiority to others and presses his claim to grace, assumes it will be granted automatically by God. In contrast, the tax collector, a despised role within the Roman Empire, because tax collectors were often guilty of extortion from the weak. The tax collector throws himself on the mercy of God and admits to his sins. And as Luke indicates, Jesus makes clear, those who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who are humbled will be exalted. Again, a message of hope for all those who are struggling and marginalized. It's only in the case of Paul's letter to Timothy that we see a darker vision, as Paul, abandoned by many, put on trial, and now in a Roman prison, anticipates his death. All the result of being a pawn in the machinations of the Roman Empire. But even here, Paul continues to argue that he's kept his faith, he's fought the good fight, and he's ready now to be poured out, to die. This hopeful vision of abundance, faith, and perseverance, and the end of chaos and violence, and a world of peace and harmony seems still very far from being achieved in our world. So what can we say about the world in which we live and the Scripture's vision of a new age articulated over 2,000 years ago? Well, clearly the Scriptures are not a blueprint to the future or a roadmap, but they are part of our faith heritage as Christians. So it's perhaps useful to look at the context in which we have seen ideas about peace and justice evolve within the Christian faith community. The first thing to note, of course, is that like all faith communities, Christianity is not and has never been monolithic. Early Christians, as articulated within the Roman Empire, and under various other empires and leaders, were very bellicose in seeking to conquer and forcibly convert others to our faith through very violent means. Christian thinkers in the early church also tried to outline an ethical basis on which prominent being St. Augustine. But we also notice a difference of tone between the Old and New Testaments in terms of the idea of peace. In the New Testament, the focus on peace is much more prevalent, but it's a notion of peace that goes beyond the common definition of peace as simply the absence of war. Rather, the word is used widely to describe a state of harmony and cooperation where conflict, although it's present in human communities, is resolved in a nonviolent way. Indeed, we use the word peace widely as Christians, and we wish each other peace and greet each other in terms of peace. The ideas of peace and nonviolence served as an inspiration to many leaders, including Martin Luther King and Mahatma Gandhi, who drew on a variety of faith ideas for their nonviolent movements that sought justice and liberation from oppression. Our human history, since the time of the biblical texts we read today, seems, however, to have been one of unending cycles of war, first between imperial powers, then later between sovereign states and their allies, all of it overlaid by a shadow of potential human obliteration, with the result of the development of nuclear weapons at the end of the Second World War. More recently, with the fall of the Soviet Union, there was an assumption that the prospects for peace in the world would be brighter. As we know, that was not to last. In addition to all the regional violent conflict that has displaced and killed many innocent people in recent decades, the past 3 years seems to have been a very troubling time and raised more difficult issues for Christians who are concerned about peace. On February 24th, 2022, we saw the Russian invasion of the Ukraine, much of it involving attacks on civilian communities. On October 7th, 2023, we saw the vicious attack by Hamas on Israelis, many of whom were young people attending a music festival. The subsequent Israeli government response to that attack has killed tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians, reduced Gaza to rubble, and continues to threaten those in the region with famine. Both of these conflicts raise, in relation to our scripture readings, a question of how we maintain hope and what is required of a faith community to bring peace to our world. Many Christian communities have responded to these challenges. Actions have included providing or calling for the provision of a refuge for those displaced by war, increased humanitarian aid for those in the regions impacted by conflict, and this is especially urgent as it relates to food and medical supplies in places like Gaza. Many have called for the implementation of a ceasefire, an arms embargo, or sanctions that target those engaged in violent conflict or providing arms to aggressors. Not all groups within the Christian community of faith agree on what is the best approach. We can all support, however, humanitarian efforts, and we can all pray for peace. Some of us may seek to use our voices for advocacy for action, either as a group or individually. The United Church of Canada has taken a position regarding Gaza that has been seen as somewhat controversial, and the Church has been accused of, in doing so, of being hostile to the Jewish community. Though, as many of us know, the Jewish community itself is deeply divided in terms of what is happening in Gaza. So what does our scripture and faith guide us to do? First, the message of our readings today is about hope. Hope that a better future is possible. It was also a message of God's generosity in the face of suffering and turmoil. But it was also a message of perseverance. Bold discipleship and daring justice call on us to continue to work in many ways to foster conditions for a just and lasting peace in the world and in our own communities, no matter how long it takes. May all of us commit in our own way to providing hope, to sharing the abundance of the world justly with all who suffer the scourges of war and oppression, and continue to work for peace.